Well, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing funds.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got
that.
Our
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Guyanese critic.
erratic
Mikhail
detective,
Rodriguez.
is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, girl, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Kingdom, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hi there, welcome to the Freddie Kissoon show with our reliable co-host Akash Persaud. Akash has been with us since February, but someone who's been with us since this program started 2 years and 6 weeks is here in the studio with us. He needs no introduction because I see him as taking on the activist role that people like me took on 50, 60 years ago. Our guests need no introduction, and you will see him. As I finish this introduction, I will refer to him as the man of the moment. But good evening, good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to keep staying with us. We have been successful the past 2 years, 6 weeks. Now, our guest this evening is, to use an adjective that people applied to me the past 10 years in this country, controversial. But that can be a very misleading term. But whatever term you want to use, here in our studio this evening is none other than Joel BHAGWANDIN. Joel, you've been here so many times that we can forfeit the introduction or shake hands. I want you to listen to this clip, and we'll take the interview from there on. Listen to this clip, Joel.
Freddie, well, as we mentioned before, you're now writing for the Ghana Chronicle as a columnist. As I said, I believe that you should have been here a little while. We've gone past that, but how do you see, in a very short way, in closing, where is Freddie Kissoon in the future? What is it? What do you have plans for?
Well, I don't have plans for anything. I think my life is over now. I'm 72 years of age. And I have told Joel BHAGWANDIN, I've told the other people, it's time for them to take up and save Guyana if Guyana is not on its footing now. I am a fan of President Ali, and I believe that Guyana has a future. But it's time for younger people to take up the mantle. Remember, it's not only the government you look at in a country. Business people do bad things, police do bad things, you have to write about it. The private press do bad things. And so I would tell people like Joel BHAGWANDIN and the younger people, they have to take up from me. I am gone now. I spend my time with my dog every afternoon at Seawall, and when I leave here, I'm gone to Janet Mohammed, who's Janet Kissoon the past 44 years. That's my life now.
Okay.
I have no interest in dining at the Pegasus.
Freddie, it was a pleasure having you here. I hope.
So, Joel, you looked at that, you heard that. What's your future as an analyst. You always tell me you don't like politics, but politics is in what you do. What is your future? You're staying for the long haul? You're going to reside permanently in financial analysis? Or you're going to say, look, I'm going to leave?
Well, just one slight correction. I never said I don't like politics. I said that.
No, it's true. You always tell me you're not into politics, right?
Yeah,
politics
I'm not
is not
right. I'm not into politics, but
you like
as an
politics.
analyst, I do dabble in politics. I do provide political commentaries and political economy analysis, because economic policies and political economy goes hand in hand. You really can't divorce the two. So to answer your question, it's a question that I have answered right here at this studio, where the Guyanese critic was doing an interview with me. He was actually filling in for you. This was, I think, sometime last year. And he asked me the same question. And in 2018, in that period, I, truthfully speaking, couldn't see a future for myself, and I couldn't see a future for the country. And the vantage point then was because I was so deeply involved, deeply entrenched in what was happening in the political economy, providing these weekly analyses, looking at the economics, looking at the trajectory of the country from an economic standpoint, and looking at the politics. What I have seen, and based on what I've seen develop, and my prediction was that it was going to be difficult to remove the former government if they lose the election, and if that were to happen, we'd become a failed state. So I had very, very low confidence in terms of the post-election outcome of 2020. So I had actually started the process to migrate in 2018. But when it comes to 2020, I was at a private sector commission at that time. So again, I was deeply involved in all that was happening there, elections, fiasco, observation, and so on. And when I realized that, I said, if there is a change in government, and I know the type of governance that the incumbent brings, looking at their history, their historic track record, I know that, and based on their plans and so on, I know that the country will have a bright future. And so I made a conscious decision that once there is a change of government, and the trajectory of the country, the path of the country in terms of building prosperity, in terms of development, would change dramatically, fundamentally, I took a conscious decision to stay in Guyana. And so I abandoned that. So I don't have any plans to migrate. I've subsequent to that decision, I started a family. One of the reasons I didn't start a family earlier is because I couldn't see a future here. And my wife at the time, I had rejected my wife in 2018. You know, I told her I can't. She wanted to get married and settle down, and I said, I can't. You need to go here separate. We need to go our separate ways.
Reject is a strong word?
Yeah, well, she was rejected, and I rejected her, and I said, I can't see a future here. I'm focusing on migrating, because that was way back in 2018, and from then we lost contact with each other. Fast forward to 2020, I realized that the future now would change. We'd have the country would be different, the future would be different, and I could now make a life here, start a foundation here. I was looking for her for 6 months, couldn't find her, and then 6 months after, I eventually found her again after how many
She should have rejected you.
Yeah, exactly.
She should have rejected you. Anyway, that's an interesting piece. That's an interesting piece here. Like, if I had known her, I would have told her to reject you. But I guess
it's a good thing.
I guess that is love, Joel. So you're going to be forever grateful for that woman.
Yeah. The rest is history. Today I have 2 beautiful kids, a nice family. So yeah.
Yeah, well,
I'm here for the long haul.
No, you got to get 3 more. You know the saying, large families are happy families. You have to get through. But Joel, we ask you here tonight. You've been so many times in this program, but we ask you here tonight because you are under the spotlight. You're under focus. Everyone, he had a consultancy with Exxon all the time. We didn't know it's this man. This man never look. And the Oil and Gas Governance Network said, oh, that is why he's been writing these things. And when I saw the Oil and Governance Network reproduce 5 of your articles, you know what? The first thing came into my mind as an academic. Why don't you judge what he said about the oil industry in those 5 articles rather than linking it to he was a consultant with Exxon? Doesn't the argument stand on itself?
Of course, and as you would have seen, I in response to those, I wrote the Staffing News saying that I stand by those positions. I stand by those positions.
So, I find that this is my advice to you. When people criticize you, look for the weakness in the holistic approach of these people, not only the particular response they have, but look at their historical faults. A lot of these people who criticize people who are in Guyana and doing things for Guyana have left Guyana 40 years ago. The Oil and Gas Governance Network are people who left Guyana 40 years ago, formed some organization in a country or part of a country, United States, called Hollis. I don't know where Hollis is. I don't know if it's in Timbuktu. And you have people here working and serving the government. And my advice to you is not only to reply on the argument itself, but educate Guyanese about the untenability of these people. Before I come into you, there is a lady named Pauline Melville who left this country when she was 8. She is now in her 80s, and she signed a letter saying we must get out of oil production. So what is this thing about the contract with you and Exxon that the people jumped on you?
So I'm glad. I was extremely flattered with the diversion of focus that all of them, the OGGN, Stabric News, and everybody else directed at me when that revelation was made by me. So for the benefit of the viewers and yourself, let me give you the background to that. But before I give you the background to that, let me say something about the OGGN network. What I have demonstrated, and the public could form their own view and opinion or own judgment, if I should put it that way, on what unfolded in relation to the matter with me and the contract with Exxon. What I have demonstrated is that as a constitutional officer sitting on a constitutional commission, which makes me a public officer of the state, I have subjected myself to the highest degree, the highest intensity of scrutiny, and I've withstood it, and my integrity is intact. I really shouldn't be saying that about myself, but the public could make their judgment. Now, what unfolded? Let's contrast that with the OGGN. The OGGN is a group of retired Guyanese in the diaspora who formed that organization in 2017 with the sole aim of providing advice to the government of Guyana. That manifested in the form of a proposal, an unsolicited proposal that they submitted to the government of Guyana to offer consultancy services, presenting themselves as experts in oil and gas, and the government rejected them. And since the government rejected them, they went on a whole different direction to attack the government. So they have no credibility, and I've attacked them and I've exposed them. And they set up the organization in a way under US law. They set it up under US law as a non-profit organization, which means it's a US organization. Assuming that they would have been successful in getting a contract with the government of Guyana, they would have been earning money in Guyana, from Guyana, reporting it on the US law. They're living in the US, and they would be effectively robbing this United States taxes because they were not going to pay taxes because of how they set up the organization. Now, how are you matching that with how are you contrasting and comparing that with me? They have no credibility and no integrity. So that is, I wanted to make that comment about them. Now, coming to me now with the contract with Exxon. Exxon wasn't the contract I had with Exxon. I said to them, now Exxon pays for advocacy. They pay professionals. They pay professionals to push their narrative, to push their agenda, and even their propaganda. Now I said what I do is very different from these people that you pay, that I know that you pay. Right? I had approached them. And I said, I've been doing technical work, not propaganda work. I've been doing technical work, and I've been doing it for free. And this has more value than what you're accustomed to paying for. And I said, are you willing to pay for this? And they were open to the idea. And the contract, we came up with a contract. And through that contract, apart from the technical stuff that I do in terms of providing analyses, analytics, analyzing the PSA, analyzing financials, etc., they also, through that contract, were soliciting advice on government affairs and political matters. Right? I'm not going to get into the details of that. So that was the parameters of the contract. Now that contract was entered into in January of this year. Now I've been writing about the oil and gas sector since 2017. So only January this year, I entered a contract where they were paying for the technical work that I was doing and government affairs and political advice. Now, the problem I had with them was when I recognized that Nigel Hughes is on their payroll. When that was revealed in the public, when that disclosure came by way of accident or whatever the case may be, Nigel Hughes said he disclosed thinking that, oh, he's doing something to show that he's credible, he's disclosing this, not knowing that I'm also working with Exxon, and I went through Exxon's rigid due diligence. I went through all the due diligence, whether I was a PEP or not, and under the policy and based on the position I hold at the PPC, I am not a PEP.
When you're dealing with Nigel, you just be careful with your words, right? We don't want to get sued, right? Just be very careful.
Nigel Hughes is a politician. He can't get sued. You gotta have thick skin if you want to be a politician.
No. Please.
All right, you relax. So I now orchestrated the whole thing with conflict of interest because I'm familiar with Exxon's policy, and I know that it's a violation of their own internal policy, and that not only their policy but also US law. And I demonstrated this. I wrote about this publicly. The vice president picked it up, and the whole country became aware of this whole thing with Nigel Hughes. So that was orchestrated in large part by myself because of, and then they came to me now and they asked me what is happening here. And I said to them, I set my conditions to you from the beginning. And my condition to them at the beginning is that I'm not going to take any position against the government, and I'm not going to push any propaganda for Exxon. Right? And there will be times when I'll be critical of Exxon. And on this occasion, you're now, this is beyond that. You're now dabbling in our politics, because your refusal, the fact that your country representative came out and said that there's no conflict of interest. That then signaled that Exxon is meddling in our politics and they have a candidate. And I wrote a series of articles outlining systematically why Exxon would do this. And the reason why is that they prefer a weak government. They like weak governments because weak governments, as was demonstrated in our case, they get their way. And I wrote an extensive piece on that. I talk about local content, how they oppose it. I talk about the gas to energy project. I talk about this GGI thing that they have. I talk about all of these matters. I was intimately involved at the very beginning. In one of my previous employment with a global firm that has an office in Guyana and also an office in Houston, was contracted by Exxon in 2021 rather, to lobby the government of Guyana against the gas to energy project and to impose a national development plan. Now I was a senior manager there, and I said to them, no, this is not going to happen. It's not coming through me. And I opposed it internally to the extent where I almost got fired, where my principals asked me if I'm working for them, for that company, or I'm working for the government of Ghana. I said, I am Guyanese first. So I brought out all these things that I was involved, not only privy to, but involved in an intimate way, to demonstrate the fact what Exxon is doing by virtue of having this incestuous relationship with Nigel Hughes. He's their candidate, and they have a strategy to hopefully make him president, but it's not going to work. It's going to fail. It's going to fail outright. They're not going to have the way. So that's the thing with me and the Exxon and the contract. And I was prepared. I preempted them, and I was prepared to forego it, because I'm not going to allow them to meddle in our politics and take absolute control of this country. And so there was some disagreements there, and I said, you could keep the contract. Terminate it.
Joel, I want to ask you, let's talk about some current things happening in the country. And I printed out something this morning to have a look at where oil prices are. And the reason I print this chart out is because I want to ask you something specific here. On December 12th of last year, the chart was showing that oil price was at around $69. Then a week ago, it was about actually in May of this year. Between around April of this year, it was at 87. It's now at 74. So which means there's a drop. But prices fluctuate right. all the time. And when I look at the entire 5-year span, you see some different things. But there's been a public debate on the public debt sustainability framework of Guyana. Some commentators argue that if oil prices collapse, we will have a debt crisis. Is this true or false? And give me your take on it.
So those commentators who make that assertion, they did not support it with any analysis. So there is no analysis. They just come up with this idea, if oil prices collapse because now everything is driven by oil, we are in trouble. But that is not how you professionally make these conclusions. You got to look at the framework. You have to do your analysis. You have to come from an informed position. Now, if you look at our debt sustainability framework, and if you look at the history from where we came from, there was a time in this country in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, when we were a bankrupt country. The debt, the total size of public debt then was 9 times the size of the economy. That means you had a debt to GDP ratio of 900%. Obviously, the economy can't service that. So that is what defines bankruptcy. When your debt is greater than the value of your asset and greater than your capacity to generate sufficient revenue, sufficient cash flow to service that debt. So the revenue service then was nearly 200%. revenue service. So that is what is bankruptcy. We came out from that period, that state, and would have achieved economic stability by the early 2000s. In 2006, we achieved economic stability. That's just about in 2 decades. We achieved economic stability, and it was not without challenge, because while we were trying to survive, trying to get out of that crisis of the early 90s, in 2005, we had the 2005 flood. Now, the 2005 flood is often described as the Great Flood, but I don't call it the Great Flood because there is nothing great about the flood, right? Especially of that magnitude in 2005. So I don't refer to it as the Great Flood. It's the 2005 flood, and we know what that was. The damages that flood inflicted on the economy resulted in a loss of the country's GDP by 60%.
Wow. So
amidst all of that, by 2006, we attained stability, notwithstanding that disaster. And all of this was done without oil. So debt sustainability, debt to GDP ratio came down to about 60% from 900%. Before we found oil, those stability framework remained in the what I would say moderate risk range of below 60%, right? So what is it now? Our debt to GDP ratio now is 28%, less than 60%. Our debt service to revenue ratio, overall, based on overall revenue, which includes oil revenue, is 6%. Now, if you take out the oil money completely, if you take out the oil resources, oil money completely, and just look at our debt service ratio with non-oil revenue, it's 9%. So that means if you have zero oil money, as it currently stands, it would not affect our debt service capacity. It would have zero impact, even if price collapsed to zero. Now, the author was arguing that if price collapsed to $20. Now, I'm saying if it goes to zero, it would have zero impact. It would not engender a crisis. Now, let me explain for the benefit of the viewers. They are what you call prudential benchmarks. How do you know that 9% or 60% is sustainable? Well, there are prudential benchmarks, established benchmarks that are based as well on country-specific factors and the capacity of the country. Now, the prudential debt benchmark, for example, for debt service is 30%. Meaning your debt service revenue, your debt service, your repayment of loans should not be more than 30% of your income. And I'm saying, as it currently stands, our repayment of loans is less than 10%. 9% if you look at non-oil revenue, and if you look at include oil revenue, it's 6%. So that is on the debt service revenue for the viewers to understand these ratios and what it means.
But while you're going through that also, there's also a school of thought that our debt to GDP indicators, those numbers are misleading. So deal with that.
So let me deal with that. Let me take my time and deal with that, right? So first, debt to GDP ratio.
Well, don't take too long, so we can get in our questions.
Right.
This is about the seventh time you've been here. You expand and expand.
But you gotta break these things down.
Break it down quickly.
I wanted to put this part in with indicators.
Break it down quickly first, so we can get in the questions. I know you.
Okay, give me 3 minutes to explain. 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's understand what is the debt to GDP ratio.
Right.
First, we got to understand what is GDP. GDP simply means gross domestic product, the acronym. But what is gross domestic product? there is a mathematical equation: government spending plus consumption expenditure plus investments plus net exports. So what that means, it is the aggregate expenditure or the aggregate production. There are different methods to measure it. The expenditure method, production method, income method.
I'm counting is 3 minutes.
So,
Yeah.
in other words, we could say that GDP is the aggregate wealth of the country. Now, how do you generate and create wealth? Wealth is created by utilizing the resources to generate those revenue. Firms involving it in all the various sectors. The firms then employ the people who represent the households, so that then create production. Production then generates revenue. From the revenue generates taxes. The government earn those taxes, and those taxes that the government earn is government revenue. So that is what GDP is. It's the aggregate wealth of the country. So the aggregate based on the value of the country's resources that it produces to generate this wealth, that determines the capacity of the country to undertake a certain amount of debt to finance that continued growth of the wealth of the country, the aggregate wealth of the country. Now, let me give you a household analogy. If you
After that, then we go to Freddie, because I know
if you go to the bank,
He's there.
you go to the bank and you want to buy a property to rent,
3 minutes to answer a question.
you want to buy I want
Joel.
people to understand these things, you know.
Yeah, but
If you go to the bank, you want to buy this property to rent it out to generate revenue. The bank would consider the value of this property. This property has a market value, right? And this property, based on the size of the property, determines the amount of revenue it would generate per square footage, right? Your rent per square footage, how much room you can make. So based on the size of this property, the square footage of this property, and the market value of the property, the bank would then take all of that into account, and it would look at something called a loan to value ratio, which means the loan that the bank would give you to buy this property should not be greater than 70% of the value. Now that ratio is the same as your debt to GDP
let's
ratio.
move
That
on.
determines your capacity to borrow. So it's not misleading.
all right,
Right?
let's move on. Before I ask my next question, you said GDP is a mathematical formula. What's the majority of 65? Anyway,
Ask Nigel Hughes. Ask Nigel
oh,
Hughes.
you got to CCJ. The CCJ made the ruling.
Yeah.
But mathematically, let's move on from mathematics. You made some definitive statements here about 20 minutes ago that Exxon has a political candidate. And obviously anybody listening to you and listening to people would know it's Nigel Hughes. Where you prepare to back that statement that they have a political interest in it?
I have. I've done it. I've already written extensively on it. You ask me anything you want to know.
So the AFC is contesting the elections. Nigel Hughes is the head of the AFC, and Exxon has an interest in you said it wouldn't happen. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think anyone can resurrect the AFC. You may have third parties coming up that may even outstrip the AFC. For all intent and purposes, the AFC was a historical factor, and it's dead and gone. I can't see how anyone can jump into the AFC arena and resurrect it. Do you want to talk about?
They're working.
You said it wouldn't happen.
So they're working with a theory which I've already.
Who's they?
The Exxon. And the forces back in Exxon and the AFC. They are working with a theory that I've picked up on, and we already calculated. I don't want to divulge much of this theory, but I'll say this much, right? This whole thing about consensus.
Give us the general thing, yeah.
This whole thing about consensus candidate. What part of the plan is to is to impose Nigel Hughes as the leader of the AFC. And at some point in time, they are going to, a certain group will try to pressure Aubrey Norton, the leader of the opposition, to give way to make him the consensus presidential candidate for the combined opposition. So there's a strategy not to collate, but to merge the AFC with the PNC, right? Or the APNU, if you want to call it that.
The PNC,
so now if the AFC doesn't have a base, they lost their base.
A long time
They lost their base. So for them to win in theory, you gotta merge with a bigger party that has a base and that has a huge base. And how are you now gonna win? You need 51, let's say 51% to win. Right? Let's say you need 51% of the vote to win. Majority in parliament. So in theory, who are the voters that they are targeting? At the AFC
sounding like a political analyst now.
Once you're doing economic and finance analysis, you got to do political analysis.
Well, every time I talk to this man, I say, look, my area is finance. So don't tell me about that anymore. You sound like a political analyst.
So at their last press conference, their biggest announcement was the appointment of an expert on indigenous affairs. Right?
Yeah, they've employed a lady.
Right.
She's that actually an official employee.
That is not by accident. So that's the other part of their strategy unfolded. And let me tell you, don't keep it a secret.
No, don't keep it a secret.
We got to expose
nothing is secret in Georgetown.
So in theory,
when you're exposing them, be careful with libel, right?
In theory, now this is pure analysis, nothing to worry about libel. In theory, they want to take over the PNC base. He becomes the presidential candidate. Now, when you look at the composition of the ethnic composition of the population, they know that it would be difficult to get crossover votes from the PPP. Mm-hmm. So they can't depend on that in theory, right? For you to win an election, you got to get crossover votes from the PPP.
Yeah, no, none of the ethnic group has a majority,
right?
Even 40%.
Or you got to target. Well, let me don't say who you should target. You look at the ethnic composition. Let me don't talk about the target. Let me talk about what their theory, their strategy and theory.
You're now a political analyst. You are talk.
You gotta allow me to speak.
Yeah.
I'm interrupting you so you won't hold back.
But you gotta allow me to speak.
So don't hold back.
You see, every time you interrupt me, I gotta go back. The theory is, when you look at the ethnic composition of the population, it is not by accident or by default they recruited an indigenous expert. It is calculated. Why? Because the indigenous population of this country accounts for 10% of the population, based on the 2012 census. So if you get 5% of that 10%, in theory you win the elections. In theory. Now that is not all. Let's bring Exxon now in the equation. So this is where it gets interesting. So one part of the strategy, consensus candidate, take over the PNC base. The other part, you need 5% of the Amerindian votes to win in theory, targeting that 10%. So they hire these people and they go in all them hinterland villages now to focus on
their sports thing last week. Yeah.
Well, ambush marketing, you call it, right? It's not like they organize the sports thing. They just turn up at an event and take out pictures and say, like, if, they get all these people. But you see, they're focusing on the hinterland communities. Now, Exxon is part of that game. So let me tell you what's the game. This thing called the Guyana Greater, or the Great Guyana Initiative, or whatever they call it. I wrote about it, what they wanted to do. I alluded to it earlier, and it was repackaged by the directive of the government. The government said, no, 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 you ain't come in and tell us how to develop our country. So the government cut them down to size and directed what they want them to do under this, under their CSR program, which they now branded as the GGI. It is 100 million US. 100 million US is $20 billion, a multi-year project. Now, this GGI project targeted. Through this GGI project, Exxon now is targeting, or Exxon is claiming, but it's not really Exxon. They had to get the approval of the government, but they are going to sell it as though is Exxon's CSR strategy, but they can't implement that without government's approval, and government had to approve that. So really and truly, that is a government of Guyana initiative in partnership with Exxon. But Exxon now is focusing heavily in hinterland regions on social development, training, looking at a whole range of initiatives targeting these communities. So that's not by accident. So that's their strategy.
You think as this thing unfolds, whatever scenarios or whatever conspiracy is out there.
Not conspiracy. Not conspiracy. These are
the definitive directions.
Yeah.
All right. Do you think that pathway that they've chosen is going to rope in people like Christopher and Glenn Lal? But if they do that, they defeat him. He was going to vote for Glenn Lal.
Funny you mentioned Glenn Lal. Only yesterday I observed on the front page of Kaichur News, the whole half of the front page,
is Glenn Lal?
They give coverage to Exxon's negotiator who was involved in negotiating the 2016, saying that he said he's had to search his conscience and he has no difficulty. He don't feel bad about the contract. He think he did the right thing. Now Glenn Lal give him full front page coverage, meaning my interpretation, Glenn Lal is now turned. This is a turn of events because now Glenn Lal is saying that this is a good deal. 4 years Glenn Lal campaigning anti-Exxon. This is
every day.
Now the man flip. Now the man so he already get buy out by Exxon too. He's bought out because let me give you more evidence. Have you noticed that he is not attacking Nigel Hughes? He is only attacking the incumbent, mainly the vice president and Aubrey Norton, because he got to attack Aubrey Norton to clear way for Nigel Hughes. He ain't attacking the only when Nigel Hughes made that disclosure one time, he did something on commenting on Nigel Hughes that how he does see no conflict of interest. But since then, he stopped, which signals to me that some deals were brokered. So now he's part of the game plan. He's part of the game plan.
You think they've roped in?
Yeah.
And what about Ram?
Well, he's sold to the highest bidder.
Excuse me. We disassociate ours. Listen, Joel, you're not going to. These people like to sue. We have a disclaimer, and we like to state clearly: the views of Joel Bhagwandin are not the views of Akash Persaud and I. Joel Bhagwandin speaks for himself. We do not endorse those views. This is Mr. Bhagwandin speaking for himself. Joel, oh no, let's go back to.
But on the same thing again, I mean, these things that you're saying here, I'm sure our viewers might be with jaws dropped what they're hearing here today.
The man has become a political analyst.
These are some revelations that I think. But what should we be guarded against then, as citizens, as people out there? What are the indicators? What you should be looking for? What we should be guarded against?
Well, I've given you the indicators, and this is why people like myself have to do this type of stuff. You don't have to take it from me. Go take the clues and go and do your own analysis and assessment. Now, what is the danger? The danger is if they succeed in implanting Nigel Hughes or installing him as president, he would then become a puppet of Exxon, and that would be good for Exxon but bad for the country, because I can't emphasize it enough. It was not easy for the government of Guyana that fought for the Local Content Act that has translated in an additional nearly $200 billion in in-country benefit for Guyanese farms, nearly over 2,000 Guyanese farms benefiting from that. Without local content, they would not have been benefiting from that. And among those 2,000 farms, you have over 6,000 Guyanese employed in that sector. That is the value of local content. We had to fight for it. Exxon was opposed to it. The gas to energy project, bringing the gas on shore, monetizing it, cheaper energy, reliable energy, making the manufacturing sector more competitive internationally, helping to make it more internationally competitive by reducing cost of energy, cheaper cooking gas and other products you get from the resource that you can then monetize and export and so on, more value to the country. They were opposed to that. Had it been them, the alternative, none of that would have manifested.
Joel, you know those Exxon people. Could you get a little job for me as a political consultant? No, I could write a paper, Joel. Please contact them, and I leave you to decide how much they're going to give me. I could write a paper for them, Joel, to show them that it's not possible for an AFC-PNC combination to win this election. First of all, people don't want to hear about the AFC. That name doesn't travel. Secondly, there's a bad taste in people's mouth about the term APNU-AFC. Thirdly, I think Nigel is someone whose intellect I respect. I will still regard him as a friend. But Nigel's politics since 2020 has shifted more to the Afrocentric area. To win an election in this country, and please talk to Exxon and let me write the paper for them. To win an election in this country, you have to come across graphically, pyrotechnically, ideologically, sociologically, philosophically, as a multiracial organization that speaks for no one ethnic group, and your déploiement, your shape, your output must be accommodating to people. And only one politician I see that has gone in that direction and is gaining traction from it is Irfan Ali. I don't see anyone who has the traction, is gaining the traction of this multiracial image than Irfan Ali. And I don't think APNU-AFC is going to get one Indian vote.
Let me come back. Let me qualify what I said, since you're concerned about libel. Let me qualify.
Yes, I'm very much concerned.
Let me qualify what I said about Christopher Am being sold to the highest bidder. Being sold to the highest bidder.
You repeat the thing?
No, here now, listen to me. Doesn't mean monetarily.
Okay, thanks, right.
Let me give you examples that he will not be able to deny or disprove. Before Ashley Singh was appointed, before Dr. Ashley Singh became the finance minister of this country, Christopher Am wanted to be the finance minister. And he was courting, back then, President Dr. Bahar Jagde was president. He was courting him. He didn't get any work, so he turned on the PPP. That's one example. He can't deny that. Another example that is in the public domain that you could reference.
We have a disclaimer. Yeah. Those views are not our views.
Desmond Trotman from the WPA wrote this in the Starbuck News. You could find it. That he was promised, the AFC had promised to make him, or the WPA had promised to make him, to propose him rather, to be the prime minister.
Yeah, well, I know about that. Right. I know about that personally.
Right. Good. So you know about that. So,
yeah, I had a discussion.
So to answer the question whether whether he would be roped in, the AFC can make him say, listen, we're giving you finance minister or whatever portfolio he want, and tell him that, and he got.
But Joel, I'm going to...
You notice he was the auditor for the elections for AFC, you know.
Yeah. But Joel, please, Joel, when we leave the studio this evening, please please carry me around to Exxon. I really need that consultancy. Listen, what is wrong with Exxon if based on what you're saying? If you're going to pluck a man to put him in the presidency, you need what you call a new man, a new face.
But that's how they repackaged him as a new.
How you going to? What? Exxon has a political consultant. That if what you are saying is based on certain enumeration of facts, then I think Exxon political understanding of Guyana and the world is abysmal, mediocre, and horribly wrong. If you go to challenge Orphan Ali, you better get someone that doesn't have baggage, and you better get someone that appears to be a very penetrating multiracial figure. Joel, I'm going to write this paper for Exxon. You got to set me up.
Joel, a couple of days ago, about a week ago, there was a lot of talk on social media, you know. And here's where it came from. On July 31st, the government went to the National Assembly for supplementary funding, and I think it was some $40 billion. Despite the biggest budget this year of $1.146 trillion. Now, the opposition and a lot of people expressed concerns, positing that this was based on poor planning. What is your take on this?
You know why the opposition is saying that? The opposition is saying that because in their tenure, 2015 to 2020, when I checked, they had only gone to the National Assembly for supplementary 8 times in 5 years. Right? Comparing to the amount of time this government has gone to the National Assembly. Now, that is, they have engineered a false, let's call it a smokescreen, to give that impression that they did. It would appear that they did better in terms of budgetary controls, but that is not the case. First, let me speak to the size of the budget. They love to say that, $1 trillion budget, this is the biggest. Every year the budget increasing. Every year is a bigger budget. Yeah. So you got to look at, you remember we talked about GDP earlier, and government spending is part of GDP, that's right, drives GDP. So you have to determine whether it is a large budget. The budget is relative to GDP. And if you look at in the 90s we had some of the largest budget relative to GDP. In the 90s we had the national budget was about 60% of GDP. This budget is less than 30% of GDP, which means it is among the smallest budget in 3 decades. When you look at it from that perspective, and that is the proper way to look at it because it is relative to something else, to other variables. Coming back to the supplementary funding specifically, the financial law, the principal financial law of the country, which is the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, provides for supplementary funding. It governs how supplementary funding, and it speaks to the procedures in how supplementary funding are to be utilized and the manner in which it has to be approved. If you look at the government, the incumbent government, this current government, they have sought approval for supplementary funding in keeping with the law. So it is not unlawful. The law provides for supplementary funding, and you could go, there is maximum amount of time you could go for supplementary in a given year. And that's 5 times in a year you could go, right? So if they go for 5 supplementary budget, that is fine. The second thing is, you will always have variances in budget, especially your capital budget, because you can't, when you plan your budget at the beginning of the year, you have inflation, you have many other external factors, shipping, supply chain disruption, so many other factors. You go out on outreaches and something happen of an emergency nature, or whatever the case is. So the law contemplates that, because that is normal. It is normal for there to be variances in budget. So nothing is wrong or nothing is bad about that. What is important is that it is in keeping with the law. Now let's go back to the APNU AFC, who only went for 8 supplementary budgets in their entire tenure, as opposed to the current government that this is perhaps maybe 8 or more than 8 supplementary in 4 years, in keeping with the law. They, the former finance minister, circumvented the financial law, deliberately breached the financial law, the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, circumvented the parliamentary approval process by illegally withdrawing monies in overdraft from the Bank of Guyana, from the government deposit accounts, to the tune of $149 billion that did not get the requisite approval by the National Assembly.
The operator signaled to us we have 8 more minutes remaining.
The Fiscal Management and Accountability Act provides for withdrawal of monies from government deposit accounts held at the Bank of Guyana. So it is permissible to withdraw money in the year, but the same act stipulates that at the end of the year, if you overdrawn these accounts, if you withdraw money that they don't have and you take it into a debit balance, you got to clear that debit balance at the end of the year. He never cleared it in 5 years, which is a breach of the act. And the reason why he breached the act was to appear that he did a fantastic job by managing the budget, because he didn't have to go for so many supplementary approvals. But it was illegally done.
We got 7 minutes more. So Joel, let's touch on the thing that I really feel irritated when I see volume 79, volume 89 on the cost of living, without any holistic approach to what is being offered to people. Like, Joel, I really think that the Georgetown Hospital, if you didn't have that place providing that service, you know the amount of money poor people would have had to touch on the, we got 7 minutes, touch on the cost of living, not for 3 minutes, just for 2 minutes, and then we go on to...
And, the president recently said something about, the cushioning of what the government has done to cushion cost of living.
The government, well, you want me to give you in less than a minute.
Yes, less than a minute. Knowing you, yes, less than a minute.
Intervention by the government to cushion the cost of living situation has amounted to over $300 billion annually, based on my calculation, which works out to effectively a subsidy of $1.5 million per household per annum. Now that's all the measures combined. In terms of the long-term measures, I mentioned this, I spoke about this at greater length on a previous program. This is why you have to invest in agriculture, build out the other sectors, so that you got to focus on the supply side, which is focusing on increasing production to bring down prices, to stabilize prices, and that is what is being done. Now, if you look at how other countries, if you compare us with other countries are in a far worse position than we are. So we have dealt with it far better than many other countries in the world.
One quick answer to Akash's question, and then we got to go.
I want to ask you, with all of this that's happening around in this country, don't you see an opportunity for you to step in the political game?
He's going to do that. He's going to do that.
In what way?
Look, the playing field, I think, is open, and irrespective. And I think with your financial background, with what you're doing, I think there is an opportunity out there for people like you, because
Joel, we need young people to come on board.
I think what I'm doing already is for now.
So we won't see in mainstream politics, perhaps.
I know you sound like a political
I don't know.
analyst.
That's not up to me to decide.
It's not up to you.
No.
You reject. There's another rejection.
Consult the family.
There's another rejection.
When we reach the bridge, we cross it.
Okay. You gotta consult the family.
I don't have plans. If you ask me if I have plans, but personally, no, I don't have plans. I don't have any aspirational goals.
Okay,
really
Joel.
politics.
But in the beginning of this program,
if I'm asked when we reach the bridge, even like how I'm on the Public Procurement Commission.
But I find, Joel, since 2020, there's a very, very serious assault on the intellectual of ordinary people, to the point that if you don't have you and I in these programs, people would be misled. If you look at what is going on, if you look at the AG,
I'm gonna continue doing what I'm doing right now.
If you look at Sunday's exchange between the AG and the Starbuck News, the man was saying, I had an exchange with a judge. You carried everything the judge said. And I wrote, this was the man saying, I wrote a 1,200-page explanation and you didn't carry it. And Joel, I seriously think when you look at the assault on democracy in this country from people who don't like the government, people who have racial thinking, you need younger people. That's why I said it in the beginning in this program. We need people not to defend, or finally to defend the government, but to defend Guyana, to defend democracy. You see what the Kaicho News and the Starbuck News have become. Joel, I'm much older than you. When I read the Kaicho News and the Starbuck News, you know what it was like in the 60s with the Argosy, the Evening Post. It was relentless against the government, and that is happening now. But we're coming up to time, so you will consider this. I said you have to step into my shoe. I'm gone and get old now.
I've already stepped up, Freddie, by doing what I'm doing here.
yeah. We're gonna have you here more often now.
I've been doing this since 2017. Not now. Doing it for a long time.
Oh, that's but the year after you decided to leave.
So I stepped up a long time.
But you have
since your days at the bank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, remember, step is lower to higher, so you got to keep climbing. You want to make your concluding statements. We have 30 seconds.
And in doing that, how much has the working at the bank, because you were a very young man when you went to GBTI, I think, how much has that shaped you, that experience?
That's my foundation. My foundation is in the banking sector. So how much it has shaped me, it's the foundation of my career.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to say a few words before we go? Not 3 minutes.
No, the few words that I'm going to say is that I'm appealing to the viewers, to the Guyanese public. Let us not allow this country to be taken over with a weak government that would give way to multinationals, because that would be bad for the people. So that's all I would say.
Okay, Joel, you've been here so often, but we're going to still do the protocol. You're one of the persons who have never refused to appear on this program, and looking back, you're one of our guests who have made this program a success. We're looking forward to seeing you again as one-on-one and as part of the panel.
And to join us one night on our calling programs on Fridays.
I think he did a call-in.
No, must come in with us. We do live call-in, yeah.
He did a call-in. Viewers, you were looking at Joel BHAGWANDIN expounding more on politics than what he's known for, finance, and he made quite a number of revelations. In fact, if you were looking at the program, and if you will look at the program, you will see he sounded equally as a financial analyst, but as a political analyst. One of the persons who has graced our studios over the past 2 years, Joel BHAGWANDIN, financial analyst. Thanks for being with us. We will see you in our next episode. On behalf of Joel and my co-host Akash Persaud, catch you later.